up from where we finished. So we're about in the 1940s still, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we didn't actually get out of the 40s technically.
No. Well, why should we? It's well, again, just to kind of like a very kind of quick recap. We started off really by we were talking about the effect of the Second World War, and
Yeah.
I do think that's something to be emphasized, isn't it? Because I think it's hard for this generation to understand the kind of global conflict. I mean, even if they can see what's going on in Palestine now, it's not quite the same. I mean, and watching films about it just is it's not going to hack it, is it?
No, I mean,
So
obviously, what's going on in Palestine or even in like Ukraine, for example, we can watch for probably the first time in terms of like I don't know, modern history. We can watch these events unfold in live streams, but
yeah,
it's not still the same as the idea of like an air raid siren going off in your town and having to grab your kids and go down to like a subway station or a bunker or any of those kind of things. The threat to us isn't here. We're just observers.
no, making your own Anderson shelter and this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, the other key part about that is we've got the access to the internet, we've got the access to the news, we've got the access to these streams, even if we want. So we've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. Whereas they were relying on like the wireless, so to speak, and their information came third party most of the time. So yeah, it's a completely different situation to even imagine yourself being in.
Yeah, and I think emphasises how kind of much more difficult in those days it would have been to live in society as a vegan.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah,
Not just in
I
terms, I mean, that's a really key point. Not just in terms of
yes,
actually standing up to people and saying, hey, this is what we want to do. Do you want to join, so to speak? But even if they'd have kept quiet and never told a soul, it still would have been very difficult.
yeah, and if people in those days were determined to do it and did do it because of their opposition to the exploitation of, well, all exploitation, or particularly the exploitation of our fellow animals, then nobody can really complain these days that it's hard to live as a vegan, can they? It's and that's the thing. Think about those people who did it back then. If they can do it, then anyone can do it, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we touched on it sort of briefly last week with the
Yeah,
cheese and other things. But yeah, and I mean, there was no milk even for a long time. So there was no alternatives to these products. You just made do with what you had.
No milk today. Yeah, there's a couple of people asking to join. So do we want to talk about how we're going to organize this? Because
Yeah. So what we potentially will do, so if you're in the UK, it's till 10 p.m. roughly. If you're in the US, then we've got about another 50 minutes or so of talking about vegan history, and then we'll take questions and stuff in the last half an hour.
yes, that'd be good.
And that way we can just kind of talk about things and we'll address the questions at the
If
end.
people put, and I think if people put questions in the chat, then hopefully we can, we
Yeah,
can see.
and any kind of really good relevant questions, I'll keep an eye
Yeah,
on if
yeah,
you want to type them out now. But yeah, if you want to, just
yeah,
hold fire for 40 minutes or so.
yeah. People might think of questions as we go along, though, and want to
Yeah,
put them in.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, like why did I tune into this live?
Yes.
Education.
Yeah.
But no, so I mean, potentially, obviously, yeah, we touched on the Second World War. I mean, the first proper kind of speech or whatever that came after that, I suppose, would have been the president's address. Although there's a couple of years in between where the vegan news was being released by Donald Watson, and it hadn't changed to actually the vegan at this point. That would be like, I think that's the second episode. Sorry, the second issue of when it becomes the vegan, and that's what I always see as kind of like one of the very first inaugural speeches. 1 year before the first cross essay, it kind of encompasses quite a lot of what they want to talk about or what they want to focus about. And although there's some iffy language from our perspective, I think it summarizes what they hope to achieve quite well.
Yeah, going back to the C word. Yeah, so what we've got then is we have the kind of the president of the Vegan Society talking to a vegetarian congress, and then it gets reported in 1947, Right. So when did it actually happen? 46, or was it earlier
I think
the year?
the actual. Hang on, I've got it up in front of me. So it says it's taken from 3 months prior. So this is autumn 47. So it would have been summer of 47, I'm guessing.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Because the Vegetarian Congress is where you get that famous picture with them all kind of.
That's correct. Yeah, the big picture with all the different people in it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And Donald Watson is sat cross-legged, isn't he?
Yes, pretty much front middle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a few people in that picture.
Yeah, I think Elsie Schriggler's in it, isn't she?
Yes, and Faye and George Henderson are both in it. Dougald Semple's in it. The guy that was president of the Vegetarian Society at the time, I can't remember his name. Is it Alan something? He's in it. There's quite a few different people in it. Yeah.
Indeed. So we're talking about a issue of the Vegan, which is the Journal of the Vegan Society, and this is reporting 3 months ago. So you're saying this is autumn, yeah?
Yeah, it's the autumn issue, 47 autumn. So yeah, it says it's been 3 months before, so somewhere in autumn, I guess.
And what did they do?
And actually,
they
in
came
that
out,
photo, it is a lovely bright day, so that makes sense.
Yeah, it came out three times. No, 4 times.
Four times, yeah. So
yeah,
each
spring,
season.
summer, autumn, winter.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I imagine in those days, just putting together the journal must have been quite a lot of work.
Absolutely, and don't forget, obviously, there wasn't like the printers or anything. So, especially at the very beginning, Donald would have had to type out each page however many times.
But would it have been run off on something like a Roneo machine or a Gestetner? I mean, were those things around at the time?
From what he says in his interview with George Roger, the first 5 issues that he does himself, he says that he copies them out multiple times.
So he was typing.
So he was typing them, yeah, each page, type it again. I mean, I don't know how many actual issues there was at the beginning, but enough. And then he was posting them out individually.
So that, I mean, how many?
Well, the first one was 25 issues, wasn't it? 25.
So, yeah, because obviously the membership back in those days would have been very small, wouldn't it? So, but even 20 to type out each page 25 times, that's some going, isn't it? That's some dedication.
It's some serious effort. And I mean, we're not talking like a one-off.
And I wouldn't have thought the typewriters.
For the first 5 issues, yeah, and obviously each issue would have had more. I mean, the first one would have probably had the least amount that he'd have had to type, but each time they'd have had growing membership, so more. Got to print out 30 this time, or 40 this time, or 50 this time.
And it wasn't an electric typewriter either. It would have been one of those old manuals.
We're talking like 1945, so
it
no.
Would be really. I remember years and years ago, I had one of those manual typewriters. It was so slow to operate.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure I have to find the particular section, but I'm sure when he answers the question when George Roger asks, he says that he started off as a novice and finished as kind of an expert typer.
Well, I'd imagine so. Everything.
I think the word is. I think the word is typist.
It just shows the commitment, doesn't it? You know, that one man was willing to do all of this and then put a stamp on them and pay each time to make sure they were all posted out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the, this is still a guy. I mean, he's lucky because he obviously talks about the fact that he managed to save £500 before he was stocked his rations, but he was only on £2.50 a week. And he was still spending his own money to make sure that these got posted out and typed up. Because obviously ink would have been expensive too. And the paper.
£2.50
a week. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, £2.50 a week. That's what he was on.
I mean, I think you've got multiple. I think to come to today's money, I know that if you go back to 50 years ago, right, I think that the value of money you've got multiplied by 15 roughly.
Wow.
To
and that's 50 years
so,
ago.
So something that cost £1 in those days would cost about £15 now. Yeah. Although it varies, obviously different commodities have gone up at different rates.
You probably couldn't get anything for a quid. You probably be able to buy a car for £1 in those days.
Well, so if you go back even further, that's in and that would have been like 74. If you go back to 44,
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's
another
even
30
mold.
year. So
Ridiculous.
you probably what you multiply by something like 25 or something in terms of what it would cost today.
Well, my family was in the kind of cinema business, so I was a projectionist at one time and everything. And you could get into the cinema for an halfpenny and a jam jar.
And the jam jar.
And a jam jar.
Yeah, because they would kind of take it back to the recycle and get paid for it.
Right, like the old bottles.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, as kids, we used to collect because you could take bottles back to the shop and like pop, for pop and stuff like that. You'd take the bottles back to the shop and you'd get money, and we'd go round collecting people, so because they couldn't be bothered
You might
to
have
go.
to define what pop is, Ronnie.
Well, it's like fizzy, like
Yeah,
So-
like
soda,
the
isn't it?
old-fashioned fizzy
lemonade,
drinks,
yeah, that's it, yeah, which was in bottles. And there wasn't anything in cans.
Yeah.
Back
Yeah,
then.
but to be fair, that was still around when I was a kid, although it was like
Yeah,
the man that would come round on
Yes.
the equivalent of a milk float. You would take back your bottles and you'd get a discount on the next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But no,
But
what
my
I've always thought was quite interesting about that president's address from 47 is obviously it's 1947, so it's a long time ago, but there's two other aspects that are mentioned in terms of feeding the third world and crops being directly related to their famine and starvation, and also the problem with the soil. And so, like,
Yeah.
right at the very beginning, these are issues that they were aware of.
Yes.
Yeah, once
Yes.
again, they talked about the soil quite a lot. Actually, it's relevant really because somebody said to me in a kind of debate thing on Facebook that you modern day vegans, you think that everything just comes from a supermarket, and of course they were trying to answer some very practical questions in those days, and that's exactly what you get from Watson's essay, isn't it? That they're talking about manure. They're talking about how to to grow things in allotments and this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting in the sense that it's not just a question of popping down to Tesco in those days.
No, and I think the amount of land that was, it seems to me from reading that, the amount of land that was given over to allotments and the number of people that grew their own veg in those days was far greater than it is today.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they also made Watson made the kind of modern day claim now that if we had a vegan Britain, as it were, then lots of land would be able to be given back to free living beings.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, really, given the fact that Britain is relatively small, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But isn't it just mad, really, I suppose, to think that all of those points that he makes in that essay are kind of all the same things that haven't changed, if anything, are worse now?
Yeah.
There's more starvation, there's more land been taken, there's more resources been taken, the soil's even worse than ever. Like, all of these things that they were talking about, we've done nothing to address.
Yeah. There's some there was a leaflet published by the Vegan Society some while ago called I think it's called Global Food Economy or something like that. And basically they're quoting research that's done by the government. It was actually government research, done by government bodies such as DEFRA, and that came to the conclusion that Britain could feed itself on a third of the agricultural land that we use at the moment. That's not, and that's without importing it, because we import a lot of it. We export some as well. That you'd only need a third of the agricultural land that we have at the moment to feed, and to be totally self-sufficient in food. So that means 2/3 of that land could then be used for other purposes, and a lot of it could be rewilded, could be allowed to go back to forest, which would be brilliant for nature and would really help to combat the climate crisis as well.
Yeah.
So, and they way back in those days, they were kind of aware of that sort of thing, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And obviously then it gets kind of extrapolated even more with the various cross essays that start 1 year after that, where they're kind of, essentially defining what the society plans to do. But I just think it's really interesting that they were thinking so far into the kind of realms of, hang on a minute, this is more than just a diet, which was the accusation that many people still make. It's like, well, why would they care about the soil? Why would they care about the famine in the third world if this was just a diet? None of those things would bother them.
Yeah,
So
well,
it
in
just
this
shows
issue,
that even from the get-go, it was always all-encompassing. They always realised just how big this movement potentially could be and the changes that it could have on the world.
yeah, and we know from the first pages of this issue of The Vegan that they're talking about slaves,
Yeah.
which is interesting. And, before we get onto the actual essay itself, because the beginning of it is particularly powerful, I think. But it's interesting because the editor of The Vegan, G. Alan Henderson, is reporting on the reception that this talk by Watson had. He said, in his address to the International Vegetarian Union Congress, Mr. Donald Watson set out the vegan cause most effectively. As the extract in this issue will indicate, it cannot, however, be reported that his speech was received with general acclamation. On the contrary, tremendous opposition was shown by some of the British Orthodox vegetarians present, causing discomfort and perplexity to the overseas delegation, who, in contrast, have displayed much sympathy. So there's another modern thing, that one of the big problems for vegans is vegetarians, right? And it was the case back then.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I think it's probably a case that those people had been vegetarians, probably most of them, for many years, and thought they were already doing all they needed to do, to not be involved in the exploitation of other animals.
And I would imagine also, in the same way that we do now, that we quite often make vegetarians feel uncomfortable when you say, well, we're vegan. It would have been the same back then, right? When they're saying, hang on a minute, we're going to make a new society because we don't feel like your one's doing enough. That's a dig. Like,
it is, yeah, because it's kind of, I'm doing enough and you're telling me that.
Yeah, you're essentially saying we're going to make our own society because yours is still contributing to all the things that we oppose.
Yeah, and those people, and it's resistance to change. I mean, those people already had to overcome, their resistance to change probably when they became vegetarian. And then there's someone coming along saying, hang on, but you kind of need to change even more.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so there's going to be more resistance there, isn't there, to that?
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we see that resistance now in 2024. So you can imagine what it would have been like 80 years ago during the war. Think of the things that people say now, like, haven't we got other things to worry about and all that sort of stuff? Well, that would have been even worse then.
Well, yes, except that, if you look at, all the slaughtering and suffering that takes place in the world, by far the most serious in terms of magnitude is that caused to other animals by humans, in particular that caused to other animals by the food industry. I mean, 50,000 animals of our fellow animals are slaughtered every second, to provide food for humans, when that's totally unnecessary because we can live perfectly well on a vegan diet. And so that is the kind of, there are other problems and other issues, but by far the biggest one in terms of magnitude is what humans do to other animals, and particularly what we do to them for food.
It's almost unbelievable thinking about those numbers, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, obviously, the numbers that they were talking about back then compared to now. Yeah. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head. We will probably get there because I think it's somewhere in the mid-50s. But there is an article by Donald Watson where he talks about the 700 million animals killed for food worldwide. It's like 700 million. How many? Like, those numbers are just like nothing in comparison to now.
Yes, and there's a couple of things to be said about that. I mean, first, the reason why it's so much more now is because the intensification.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, I'm not sure what the world population was then, but obviously significantly lower than what it is now. Yeah,
growing population, and also that's probably only land animals, because very often fishes are ignored. and worldwide, the number of fishes and other sea, sea animals, sea living animals that are killed by the food industry, it's 14 times the number of land animals. It's hugely, and then this is the kind of forgotten, because fishes are highly sensitive, highly aware creatures, and we need to remember them as well. It's not just the land animals that we're concerned about. And the other thing, there's been people are consuming more animal products because those products are produced more cheaply because of intensification, and the population has grown, and which emphasises how much harder we've got to work in terms of educating people to become vegan.
Yeah.
Well, also, I suppose in the war years, the issue of obesity wasn't even an issue, was it? So it's not as though people were overeating back then.
No, that's very true too.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, obesity is like such a serious problem these days.
Yeah. So, Andy, do we want to move on to what he actually said then?
Yeah, I mean, how much of this do you want to read? Just the 4 points, or a bit more than that, or?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I really like the first paragraph myself, and that starts: the vegan believes that if we are to be the true emancipators of animals, we must renounce absolutely our traditional and conceited attitude that we have the right to use them to serve our needs. So again, going back to what you were saying, when you read this stuff, it sounds like it could have been written today, doesn't it?
Absolutely,
We must supply these needs by other means, which is one of his themes, because he said at one point, in fact, I think it's coming up, throughout history, whenever humanity has risen against cruelty and exploitation, well, he said he has benefited himself. So this is where they talked about humanity in those days, as well as those he's emancipated. And so that becomes a theme in Cross's work, which is this idea that he was talking about slaves and slave masters, and he was saying that both are harmed by slavery, in the same way that feminists say that both men and women are harmed by patriarchy, right? And so he says this is the law of progress, which is quite interesting.
This is my favourite sentence that you're about to read.
Yeah. Therefore, further advance will follow if we seriously tackle those cruelties upon which civilization is still so largely built. And then this is the bit that I really like.
Yeah.
If the vegan ideal of non-exploitation were generally adopted, it would be the greatest peaceful revolution ever known, abolishing vast industries and establishing new ones for the better interests of humanity and other animals alike. So he said men and animals there.
Yeah. But this was written, I mean, either in 47 or before that, considering everything that's just happened, and that's the way that he's talking about it, that this could be the greatest peaceful revolution the world has ever seen. This veganism,
and it was the revolution that was needed. I mean, they're just at the tail end of this massive conflict. I mean, I don't. But well, it's interesting because they probably would have known about. Well, they would have known about the atomic bombs by then.
Yes. I don't know how much about the H they'd have known, because that would have been trickling out for years afterwards. They'd have known the basics, but I don't know how much about the details they would have known.
Yeah, it's the whether they would know about the camps or not is,
I think they would have by 47. They'd have probably known that they existed, but I don't know whether they'd have known the inanimate details of what went on. I think that took a long time to come out.
Yeah.
So they'd have probably known that there were camps that people were kept in, but I think it probably wouldn't have gone much further than that.
And then he goes on to these 4 things, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. So he talks about the 4 things that veganism is going to kind of do for the world, really. First of all, establish the right, for the first time, the right relationship between humans and other animals. there would be great improvement in human health. And he talked about the original frugivorous diet. So, kind of a fruit-based diet, essentially. Because he also talks about raw food a lot, doesn't he, as well in this?
Yeah.
And eliminating the risk of infection and poisoning arising from using animal foods. Veganism could abolish malnutrition and famine, which has always been a vegan argument. People have said about vegans over the years, oh, you care about other animals, but you don't care about humans. Not true. And then the thing about the soil fertility throughout the world, which of course a lot of people in the agricultural business would dispute that. They would think that if you don't have animal manure, then soil fertility would be damaged. But there's a quite a lengthy argument about that later in the essay.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I've always looked at those 4 points as, if you were a Leslie Cross, for example, that's your focus, number 1, and 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, however many others. That's your scope. That's how it could have would have been. And even then, the priority order, if you look at it, the number 1 was always, that's the focus, and then these are kind of like the other things that come along the way. But they're always there. They're not side shoots, so to speak. They're just as important things, but they realise that the focus is always going to be on other animals. Yeah. The numbers then were nothing like what they are now.
He talks about the abolition of the slaughterhouse as being absolutely crucial for what he calls the reconstruction of human society. So, I mean, going back to the kind of moral aspect of it, and even the spiritual aspect of it, Ronnie, you were talking about the numbers.
Yes.
I've always thought it's amazing, really, when you think that every society that you could think of, in those societies, dotted around a few miles apart, are houses of slaughter where people every day go and slaughter other animals all day long.
Oh, absolutely.
Or even overnight.
Yes, absolutely. It's just, it's this continual process. I mean, if you look at it on a world scale, it's going on just all the time. It's something that's absolutely horrendous, and it's something that, people kind of live their lives without being aware of this horror that's going on all the time. I mean, but I think people almost deliberately oblivious to it. And I always say it's a bit like The Matrix. In the film The Matrix, there was this horrendous situation, wasn't there, where people were kind of they were being used by machines in The Matrix, weren't they? Where people were living their lives, or they thought they were, living their real lives, totally oblivious to this underlying horror that was going on all the time. That was kind of almost the basis of everything. And that's very, very similar to, what we do to other animals. Everyone lives their lives, people have their happy times, their sad times.
Well, that cartoon that's still on YouTube is called The Matrix, isn't it? That's even more relevant in a way.
That's kind of, yes. And and in the sense, the number one thing we have to tackle in terms of the kind of the seriousness of the situation is, what we as a species are doing to other animals, particularly in terms of food, because that's where we're talking about by far the largest number. And then also, as well as that, you see, the thing is that, animal farming and also to a large extent as well, the fishing industry, those things kill animals twice, because not only are animals directly killed by those industries, but that the huge harm that those industries do to the environment and natural world kill masses of other animals. I mean, animal agriculture is a huge contributor to the climate crisis. And what have we got as a result of the climate crisis? The main victims of that are other animals. For instance, it was just in recent years, the forest fires in Australia attributed to the climate crisis, didn't it? Estimated
Yeah, also Greece as well.
And in Greece, well, various parts of the world, and that's only one aspect. I mean, this is going on all the time, where there's been huge wipeouts of other animals because of the sea heating up and because of not being able to get food and all these various things caused by global heating. And a big contributor to that. There are some studies that say the main contributor to the main cause actually of global heating is animal agriculture. Actually, when everything's taken into consideration. So this is a hugely serious issue. It should be the number one priority for the human species to end our consumption of animal products, and we can all do our own. We can all do our bit by not consuming animal products ourselves, and then through that changing the culture and changing the politics, so that our societies no longer do that.
Yeah, I suppose we've got the advantage of being able to actually do something on a personal level, as well as everything else. But
That's
immediately.
Right.
See, what Watson is actually arguing in this essay, Andy, that we're not decent. That he says we need to establish a decent order. But I mean, if you think about the plastic and the environment, and,
I mean, would you argue with him?
You can't, can you? I mean,
we're worse now than we were then as well. I mean, one of the things that I always think just shows kind of humanity for what it is when we have like a hot day and I have one of the side of like panoramic pictures of the beach and the litter that's been left in just a few hours of humans turning up. And it just epitomizes, we're not decent.
I mean, back in those days, things would have been reused and recycled much more, and there wasn't this proliferation of plastic.
Yeah,
that stuff was in cans or it was in glass bottles. Plastic hadn't come on the scene to a very great extent.
Yeah.
I remember when I was young, when I was growing up, like in the 50s and 60s. It was very much the same then. That plastic, you didn't really get anywhere near the plastic that you get now.
Yeah, even children's toys were wooden, weren't they?
They were, yeah. But one thing that's really important for people to remember that it's really important that we kind of this problem of plastic is dealt with, especially single-use plastic that's just discarded. We need to move away from that situation. But if people really want to, and obviously loads of this plastic ends up in the ocean. The oceans are heavily polluted with plastic. But the number one thing that people can do to avoid plastic pollution of the ocean is actually not to eat fish. Because the fishing industry is responsible for half the plastic in the ocean through discarded nets and other fishing tackle. So if it's great, stop using the plastic straws and stop using cups and all that. Yeah, brilliant. But the number one thing you can do is to stop eating fish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, where do you want to go next, then, Andy?
Well, I was just going to quickly read out because I like literally where you were just at that last sentence of that. What's it? The third paragraph where it's
exploiting the weak.
Not determined by what we believe, but by what we do. Particularly by what we do to others less strong than ourselves. Once we accept that the strong have the right to exploit the weak, and the basis upon which any decent society can be built is destroyed. And I mean, that's the essence of speciesism years before it's been coined as a word.
Yeah, it's actually also the essence of what is the underlying. If you're saying there's an evil that underlies everything, that kind of in the sense almost that pretty much everything that's wrong in the world, and that is supremacism. And speciesism is an element of supremacism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And all these things.
But that is just a big word for might is right, though, isn't it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is might is right is what he's talking about, but that is essentially supremacy, isn't it?
What he's saying, yeah, and it underlies. This is why there's oppression everywhere. racism, sexism, homophobia, capitalism. They're all elements of supremacism, speciesism.
Yeah, we can move on from there to the cross essays if you want. I mean, Man and Nature's or Humans and Nature.
Well, I think we ought to mention the last two kind of broad themes, really, because he talked about the physiological thing. I think we can leave that, but he then talks about food shortages.
Yeah,
about how we could abolish that throughout the world. So again, they were back to this idea that people realized that food shortages were a problem, and now, I mean, we've got thousands and thousands of kids dying every day of food related issues, right? And so it hasn't gone away.
No, it's worse. It's worse now than ever.
Yeah, and what people don't realize, again, going back to what Ronnie was saying, that a lot of people are kind of oblivious to these kind of things, is the fact that the farming lobby often will be competing, with the aid agencies for grain.
Absolutely,
right? So
again, I mean, from when this was written in 47, we grow exponentially more food than ever, but also more people starve than ever.
Well, a huge amount of that of the food that's grown doesn't go to feed the human population; it goes to feed farms animals.
Yeah. It's just to think that he made such a big point about this all these years ago, and I mean, obviously, there's no figures here, but yeah, in comparison to now, it would have been minute, and that problem's only got worse. And I mean, these people pointed this out 80 years ago.
Oh, absolutely, and it's everything they say rings true today.
Yeah, I mean that's what I found when I was like last summer when I was reading through the various issues. I mean, there must have been so many times that I was like screenshotting various things and sending it to Roger and be like, "This could have been written last week."
Mm.
It's so poignant in the sense that like nothing's changed, and that's quite shameful too, to realise that these people were talking about all of these things, and yet all these years later we're still talking about them.
Well, all these years later, the situation is
worse,
so much more serious, and so it's so much more urgent. It was been always urgent. To
what do you think of this then, guys? They, we said before that they have this big kind of focus on the soil, and we know that Eva Batt talked about that, and Kathleen Janaway as well. Now, Watson says that if we feck up the soil, that's going to be the greatest disaster that could befall, humanity, essentially, right? And it was in the 1980s when Food for Food for a New America came out. John Robbins, right?
Yeah.
And he was talking about the soil. So is the situation with the soil worse now than it was?
Yeah, 1,000,000%. Why do you think almost every animal that people consume is given an artificial B12 supplement? Because there's no cobalt left in the soil. So yeah, the soil is the worst it's ever been. The only thing that's changed is that we have various ways now of changing things. It's why farmers get paid to leave land for X amount of time and all that sort of stuff. And obviously when this was written, the idea of hydroponics or fermentation I suppose fermentation would have been possible.
I think to let people kind of visualize this. I mean, we're essentially living on a floating rock in space, and on that rock there is in various places a layer of soil, but it's not that deep, is it?
And it's totally living organism. I mean, someone who's written really quite recently some really, really good stuff about the soil, and it explained about how it's a living organism, how it has to be preserved and protected. It's George Monbiot, in his book Regenesis, which talks about how we totally need to change our food system.
I'm sure you'll get royalties for that book, Ronnie.
Well, I mentioned it because
but no, you are absolutely right there. I mean, obviously George is very interested in the fermentation side of things. But
yes, that's right.
The soil is the worst it's ever been, ever.
Yeah.
But it's still not at the point where it's impossible to fix it either. We're just not trying.
Oh no, because I think because this profit to be made out of not trying all these companies making the artificial fertilizers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's become a market in itself now. Yes,
and all those things, But there's only so much that you completely deplete the soil, and that's the end of it. I mean, this is dust bowls, for instance, in the USA, caused by the destruction of the soil by the farming methods used over there, for instance, and yeah, I mean, the thing is if we are all to live on a vegan diet, because that requires so much less land, it means that it would be much easier then to produce everything organically or veganically, using compost and that to help the soil, and so it would be easier under those circumstances to improve the soil and bring it back to the condition that it should be in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and one of the things that I actually learned from reading some of Kathleen Genoway's work was how important trees are to the soil too, in terms of protecting them from like soil erosion and all sorts of other things. And obviously, the more we
stops it being washed away, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, absolutely.
An example of that is we've had this huge problem of flooding in this country. I mean, I live quite near a town that is constantly flooded. There's a river runs through it, and the people living near the river, they're constantly, there's flood barriers, but they tend to get breached really frequently.
You really must get that toilet of yours sorted out.
Yeah, the toilet. Well, yeah, as a vegan, yes, that's right. Well, we actually do have problems with our toilet because the sewage system can't cope with what it's required to kind of cope with, and that's also to do with flooding and excess water going down the drains and everything.
Yeah.
Now, a major contributor to flooding is sheep farming.
Yeah.
Right, and the reason for that is because where the sheep graze on the uplands. Now, if the sheep weren't there, that would be woodland, right? And when it rains, the trees and the soil that's created by those trees would absorb a huge amount of that water, and it wouldn't come downstream. But because that land is denuded of trees by the sheep, right, the water just rushes downstream, and you get the flooding. And in actual fact, what happens is, further downstream, that water damages agricultural land. So the net effect of the sheep farming is actually reduction in food production because of the agricultural land downstream that is damaged by the flooding.
It's a lose-lose, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And so,
just another high figure of inefficiency of animal agriculture.
We need to allow that land to go back to woodland, which almost everywhere would go back to woodland if it was left. That land wasn't grazed by sheep. I've got some friends who live in a valley surrounded by hills. They've got about 4 hills around them. 3 of those hills are completely bare, and one of them is full of trees. And the reason that one of them is full of trees is because it's an RSPB sanctuary, RSPB bird sanctuary, and there's no sheep there. The other ones are grazed by sheep, and so that there are no trees on them. They're just kind of grass, and not even grass where that's gone as well.
Yeah.
And all of those would be the same. All of those would be woodland if they were just left.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think people realise just how important it is, not just to have the trees as they are, but also what the trees leave behind. So obviously in the autumn, the leaves start to fall down, and that creates like foliage on the ground, which it's like a protective layer when it rains heavy. So when the trees are gone, not only have you not got the canopy that stops the rain coming down, you haven't got the foliage being created at the bottom either. And then if you factor in sheep that are scrambling all the roots, all the brambles, all the shrubs, all everything else that's left, no wonder the soil's fucked. No wonder the soil's eroding. It's kind of standard. It's just what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and it's so inefficient. The amount of food you get from from sheep farming is kind of tiny, compared with, you know, compared with, growing vegetables and stuff like that, or even, the benefits of allowing that land to go back to forest are absolutely huge in lots of ways, in terms of combating the climate crisis, in terms of providing habitats.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another key part just in itself, isn't it? The amount of small grounding and nesting birds that sheep disrupt and eat the eggs of too, which people don't really talk about too much.
Well, yeah, you've got no chance. Ground nesting birds got no chance in that kind of situation. And it's something people don't think about that.
No, I mean, it's obviously, as you said, like it's the habitats from those that lived in the trees, those that lived below the trees, those that lived in that foliage, those that lived in the ground underneath. All of those have been disrupted. All of those have been displaced.
Yeah, and of course, even trees can be used as a food source, because we could grow certain areas to go nut trees, and then protein, as well. So the trees, can be kind of multi-purpose.
Being a ground nesting bird doesn't seem to be a very evolutionary clever thing to do, really, though, does it? When you think about it.
Well, I would imagine that evolution hasn't had time to catch up with animal agriculture is the problem.
Yeah, fair point.
Once upon a time there weren't sheep everywhere.
At the time they evolved, it was a much safer. I think.
Yeah, that's the issue. Evolution takes a long time for these mutations to happen, whereas obviously animal agriculture has boomed just in the last 50 years.
Yeah, well, like everything else, isn't it? Kind of industry and everything else. I've got one issue. Again, from this thing to discuss.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want, we might as well just finish on this one, and we'll start with the cross ones next week.
Yeah, because something I never thought of, because I was listening to your narration earlier on, Andy, and when it came to that bit about, it was talking about can the waste from a diseased flesh-consuming human be safe? And he made this point. He was on about the dangerous nature of poo eventually, even in a healthy carnivore. And he reckons this is shown by the instinct for these creatures, the carnivores, to bury their waste.
Bury their poo, yeah.
Yeah, but very vegetarian other animals have no such instinct. Actually, I had a quick look at that. That's not entirely true. For example, wolves and other free-living beings will leave their waste as a kind of marker. So it's not entirely true. But the point that I thought was really interesting was the fact that just think how dangerous human excrement is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the flesh eating, right? Which means that what's going into the sewage system is much more toxic and difficult to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than in a vegan population.
And if you think of like manure is used on the land, isn't it? And horse manure, has been, is used as fertilizer, isn't it? For instance, but we don't use dog poo as a fertilizer or cat poo as a fertilizer, do we? And there's very good reasons why we don't.
No, and I mean, on that note, very quickly, like, think of how many people have a cat that comes and poos in their garden, and they go, oh, brilliant, that'll really help the flowers. Thanks, cat. No, it's the absolute opposite, isn't it?
Yes, and so if we were to consume a purely vegan diet, then our excrement would then be suitable to be used as a fertilizer. And it would be a shame not to be, because otherwise it's a huge waste, isn't it? I mean, obviously it would have to go through some kind of process first, but
yeah, there's a name for it, isn't it? Something like moon manure or something, isn't it? Because there was a eco experimental place in Wales, and they had these things where you kind of go upstairs to the toilet in the backyard type of thing. And essentially, you just kind of, it drops into like a manure pit, but it's like a human manure pit, right?
Yes.
And so this thing is designed that you then take the manure out the back of it, but it means that if everyone was vegan, the manure that is created would be much richer and you wouldn't have to treat it or anything.
No, it'd be usable.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's a little bit
Not
like
to
the
mention,
idea of,
obviously, in a vegan world, we would compost a lot more too.
yeah, well, again, that's what Watson said, isn't it?
Mhm.
That,
I mean, we could, in theory, we could be doing that now, but yeah, that'd be one of the things we definitely could do.
Certainly for probably more for people in the UK, but yeah, it would be of interest to people anywhere in the world. There's an organisation over here called the Vegan Organic Network, and it's really promoting farming and the growing of crops veganically, without the use of animal manure, and involving composting and all that kind of thing. And that would be sort of really interesting website for people to look at that were interested in this.
And they do a vegan camp out, don't they?
I think they do have some kind of a vegan camp up there, yeah. And there's a farm called Tolhurst Farm, which is, I think, somewhere in the Oxford Reading area. It's around that area in England, where it's completely veganic. They don't use pesticides or artificial fertilizer or anything like that. And the guy that runs that has got on land that was really really poor quality when he first started. He gets very, very good yields using that method, and it's really like an example to how other farmers could do it. And once again, George Monbiot is a big fan of that, and that's in his book, because getting more royalties now, and that's something that he's kind of really into, that way of farming as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the potential options, if we were looking at it from a completely different perspective, are endless and far better, far more efficient, far more sustainable. But we just have to change our direction, essentially.
I think there are so many vested interests.
Yeah.
In terms,
like you mentioned earlier, it's not just the fact that we've got the original vested interest, like i.e. animal agriculture. You've now got these companies that are making the artificial fertilizers, or you've now got these companies that are making crop death scarers and that kind of stuff. There's so many industries within the industries that now want to slice and don't want the industry to fall. That there's a lot of fingers in there.
You've also got the people that provide the food for the companies like Cargill, for instance, who provide the food for intensively reared chickens, for instance, amongst other other animals that are held captive. And so, because for instance, I think it's something like 80% of soya that's grown. People talk about this destruction of the Amazon, for instance, for growing soya, right? And you'll get people turn around and go, "That's your fault. Are you vegans drinking your soy milk?" When in actual fact, it's not, because 80% of the soya that's grown in the world goes to feed farmed animals.
Yeah.
So it's people that consume edible products who are largely responsible for the destruction of the rainforests to grow soya and to grow other crops that are used to feed farmed animals. And so, and these companies that are involved in producing and supplying that, they're also going to exert pressure to keep the system the same as it is now.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
It's a mathematical issue, though. I think we talked about it in one of the Still Alive shows, Ronnie, because obviously there'll be a lot more human consumption of soy in a vegan world than there is now, right? It's just that it's not going to be as much as the non-human use of it now.
Well, you see, the thing is that, and also you see, soy is a protein source, but there are lots of other protein sources that vegans can turn to, and so what we can also do, and I think this is something that the founders of the vegan movement were very big into as well, was to produce our food more locally, to grow our food nearer to where we are. rather than having stuff come up around the world. And so, what we would be growing for, to feed ourselves in this country would be crops that were suitable to be grown in this country. Now, some soy does grow here. You can grow soy in the UK. You can grow tea in the UK. The only reason why we get the tea from India and all that is because it's cheaper.
Yeah, most of this boils down to price at the end of the day. It's done. It's what we can and can't do. And then obviously, if we moved indoors, we could grow all sorts of other things too.
Yeah, we can. We could be self-sufficient. We could still consume most of the things we eat now. Depending on, some stuff might have to be produced in kind of greenhouse type conditions, whether we'd want to do that. But you see, we've also lost a large number of varieties of food. Well, they're not lost, but they're just, people don't know about them, because what's happened with the rise of the supermarkets, they tended to concentrate just on particular types of food, and it's usually the stuff that's got a long shelf life.
Yeah.
So there's loads of varieties of stuff that people used to eat. If you go back probably a couple of centuries or so, the variety of different food that people eat, probably a couple of centuries or so, the variety of different food that people eat, like all the different varieties of stuff, but what tends to happen is you just get one or two of the varieties in the supermarkets, and nobody knows about all the other stuff. And so it was much more, what people ate was much more diverse.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. If you go to one of kind of like those Asian markets or something like that, the varieties of just fruit, for example, there's fruit that I have to look at the name of because I don't recognise it by sight.
A lot of that does come from abroad, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It just shows that they're not constricted, or they've got a different culture.
I think maybe in some other countries, the food that they actually eat is much more varied than what we think they eat.
But you're right, you don't see that kind of stuff in a traditional British supermarket now.
But a lot of that stuff could actually be grown here, although stuff's not native to this country. I mean, tomatoes and potatoes, for instance, come from they originate in South America. We never had them till the conquistadores and all those people that went and pillaged the southern part of America. We never had tomatoes, we never had potatoes. We've only had them a few hundred years.
Oh, it's all worth it then, Ronnie.
Oh yes, to get a spud, so we can have chips. Yes, yeah. So but those things go perfectly well over here. But we never. You go back a few hundred years, there weren't any potatoes. Instead of potatoes, people ate things like turnips and parsnips, and for their starchy aspect of their food, and wheat and stuff like that.
Well, speaking of food, because we're on to the Q&A bit. Somebody's saying I'm not vegan because vegan food is so boring, and
all of it.
Well, I never understand that line. It's boring.
Well, the thing is that first of all, you're looking at it the wrong way. The reason to be vegan is so that you don't contribute to the slaughter and suffering of other animals. You don't contribute to the oppression and exploitation of other animals, because we can live without doing that, and because we can live without doing that, then surely it's wrong to do that, and surely it's wrong to contribute to that. So the first thing to say is, right, I'm not going to do that anymore. And right, having decided to not do that anymore, that's when you start thinking about, well, what food can I eat now, right? And if you look at what makes food tasty, say you're eating a hot dog or a burger, what is it that makes that tasty? It's not the actual meat, is it? It's the onions, it's the sauces, it's the relish, it's all those things, right? So, and you can do that equally just as well. With you take something like a curry. What makes a curry taste so good? It's the spices, isn't it? Right? And you can have the same spices whether you've got meat as the protein in that curry, or whether you've got something like chickpeas or tofu. You can use the same spices and it tastes just as nice. Yeah. So I can't understand why anyone says that
It's just pure ignorance. Because I mean,
yes,
it's not even just the we're talking about like the flavorings and things like that. Think of like how broad a range that encompasses. So that's anything from like, I don't know, pomegranates to rice that they're saying is boring. So what are they eating?
Well, yes, I mean that's what I'd ask, because of course, what are the things that make food tasty? It's stuff like chili, isn't it? It's onions, it's garlic, it's the other herbs and the spices. Those are the things that make food tasty, and those things can be used with vegan dishes. I mean, I eat an extreme tasty diet, and I have done since I became vegan 52 years ago. And this is why I don't understand. My wife just said, and it's because you're married to me. She said, I think my food would be a lot more simple if I had to kind of do it myself.
Just have beans on toast every day.
Well, I think there'd be a lot of stir fries. So I remember when I remember living in the squat many years ago when squatting was a big thing in London. And we all ate vegan because there were vegans and meat eaters and vegetarians. But we decided, right, if we just cook vegan, then everyone can eat it. So whoever cooked vegan, and every night it was a stir fry, just different types of stir fry. But it's fine. It's a very healthy way of eating, and you can change the flavours for it.
What's the best thing about being vegan? For me, it's the easy pooping. So I was reading today. Apparently, those weird humans who do the carnivore diet, apparently they do have a lot of toilet problems. First of all, I think that that they have
they can't find it or can't use it or
the toilet. Yeah, it's mainly they don't need to use it because. I mean, I suppose the flesh shrivels up in your system.
Yeah.
And obviously we know that roughage kind of pushes it through and everything. Because we've got such long intestines compared with a natural carnivore, then it means that you've got a lot of rotting flesh in your system for a long time, which is exactly what obligate carnivores don't do. They get it in, use it, and get it out real quick. And so it's apparently there's quite a lot of problems with the, I mean, I know there's a lot of people. I mean, what is it, Jordan Peterson? Doesn't he recommend this diet of flesh only or something?
Yeah.
I don't know actually.
Just very quickly on that note, one of their big sort of like, I don't know, guru-like guys of their carnivore diet, a guy called Paul Saladino, has actually recently come out and stopped doing it because it massively affected him in various ways.
The bottom line, though, is that we all know that.
Is that with the jokes again? We're talking about pooping, and you're talking about the bottom line.
The bottom line. Yes. I was going to say that Jordan Peterson doesn't need to go to the toilet because the shit comes out of his mouth anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There we are.
Constant verbal diarrhea.
There we are. But the thing is, we can live, healthy. I mean, obviously, it's possible to eat a poor vegan diet. You could just live on chips, and that would be a vegan diet. But it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be recommended for health, would it? But on a healthy vegan diet, we can all live perfectly well. And so, why are we imprisoning, enslaving, oppressing, exploiting, slaughtering? In most cases, a tiny fraction of their natural lives, this huge number of other animals. Isn't that totally unjustifiable? And isn't it unjustifiable for any of us to be part of that? Isn't it in many ways the most important thing anyone could do in their life to refuse to be part of that, to no longer be part of it? Isn't that's the first thing? It's not, it's not about pooping. It's not about, these other things, is better in terms of your digestive system, but that's not the main. That wouldn't be the main reason for becoming vegan. The main reason for becoming vegan is not to be part of this horrendous exploitation and oppression that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely well said. Is there any other questions you noticed, Roger?
No, I've been through them. There's not a lot of them actually, and also we've got some really good people in the chat answering them as well. But no, there's not a great deal.
Okay, well,
I take it that means that you haven't seen any either, then.
No, I the ones that you read out were pretty much the only ones that I saw too.
Well, that you, Ronnie, you've not been looking, have you?
I haven't seen anything particularly that jumped out from ones I saw.
Yeah, there was one.
There you go. There's a question for you two more so than me from Aisha. What were people's reactions to you being vegan when you first became vegan?
Well, I can tell you about my mum because
I was shot. I was.
Right. Yeah, you still haven't. You're still dead. When I started off becoming vegetarian, I went vegetarian because my sister's first husband, when she started going out with him, he was vegetarian, and that's how I found out. And he was because he thought it was wrong that animals should be killed for us to eat. I don't think he knew about enough to become a vegan. Otherwise, he probably would have done. But anyway, when my sister and I said to my mum that we'd become vegetarian, the first thing she said was, "Go out in the garden and eat the grass. It needs cutting." So anyway, and then when I went vegan, I mean, that was off the Richter scale as far as she was concerned, and she just turned around and said, "You'll be dead within a year." So, and a lot of people thought that. They just thought that you kind of needed animal products to survive, and you couldn't do so on a vegan diet.
Well, wasn't there a doctor about 2 weeks ago said that you can't really be a vegan for more than 2 years or something?
Yeah, so I mean, it's just nonsense.
Yeah, I saw that as well. Yeah, 2 years, he said.
Totally against the science,
Well, I mean, how? I mean, when's that going to catch up with you two then?
Well, I either I've been a vegan 52 years, or I've
been 50 years longer than what he's saying.
Or I might have been a vegetable eating zombie for 55.
It's not like he's a little bit wrong, is it? Come on.
Yeah, I think it can be kind of. I think in the end, my mum realised that I wasn't going to be dead within a year. As the years went on, she realised that her prediction wasn't quite that accurate.
But she sabotaged your food, didn't she, for a bit?
Well, yes. What happened was I'd been vegans, 6 weeks. I mean, I've been philosophically vegan for 6 weeks, and I thought I was kind of eating a vegan diet because basically what happened was when I said I was becoming vegan, my mum said, "Right, I'm not going to make that. You have to make your own vegan thing." And she'd do the vegetables and the potatoes, and then I'd make my own savoury dish. And I had this little enamel pot that I used to cook things up on the stove, and it'd be lentils, or it would be chickpeas, or it'd be something like that. And I'd fry up some onions and make myself like a savoury thing. And anyway, after I'd been doing this about 10 days, and I walked in the kitchen one day, I caught a breaking an egg into my pot. So I said, "Hey, Mum, what are you doing? I don't eat eggs. What are you doing that for?" She turned around to me. She said, "I'm keeping you alive." So I said, "Well, I don't want you to do it. I don't, I said, I won't eat here. I'll go out to eat. I won't, I don't know where I thought I'd go out to eat, but anyway." And so
be it on your own head.
She said to me, "All right, I won't do it anymore. If you die, you die. I'll wash my hands of it," she said, "so I won't do it anymore." So whether she's secretly been doing it all this time, I mean, she passed away some years ago, perhaps she left it in a will, someone sneaking in the house every day and break an egg into my food. Maybe that's still going on. Who knows?
You got an egg supplying ghost. There's two questions. Well, one observation is that humans are omnivores, so ... And also, I want to ask about this phrase that you've been using all evening, Ronnie, the vegan diet.
Yes.
Given the fact that we all like to point out that veganism isn't a diet.
Yeah. Well, first of all, to deal with them in order. The thing about we're omnivores. Well, there is an argument now that actually we're kind of really herbivores, because if you go right back to kind of the evolution
of frugivores
or frugivores, the evolution of the human species, right? That how would humans have been able to really catch any animal to eat? They'd all outpace us, wouldn't they? So it was only when humans banded together and were able to do any kind of organised hunting, where they kind of were able to use kind of teamwork to catch animals.
Or scavenging.
I think the hunting went on a lot less than people said. I think there was a lot of scavenging, but you see, up until, but before that, before people were able to team together, how would anyone have caught anything? So we must have lived largely, very, very largely on, fruits and vegetables, mustn't we?
Yeah, and don't forget as well, which people always seem to, that these first animals that the first humans would have interacted with would have been significantly larger than any that exist now.
Yeah, but even the omnivore thing, see, if you've been omnivore means we can eat, we can survive on a wide range of different food. That doesn't mean we have to eat.
No, it means able to, doesn't it?
I mean, I've got a cat just by me here. Now, I could kill this cat, not I would. And I could eat her, and I could derive sustenance from, but people would be horrified at that.
You heard it first on this channel, folks. Ring the RSPCA.
I'm clipping just that first bit.
What I'm saying is just because we can eat something, there are people that are cannibals. They, of the humans, divide their, get their sustenance from other humans, but we wouldn't countenance that. Just because we can eat something and we can survive by eating something, or we can derive sustenance from that, doesn't mean that we should.
No, I mean, I can make a fist with my hand.
Yeah.
Just mean that I should punch someone in the face.
Should. And so, if we can survive healthy, which we can, without causing this oppression and killing of other animals, then surely that is what we should do. Surely that is we're actually morally obliged to make that choice.
Yeah, well, that's what they say in philosophy, don't they? That a can becomes an ought.
And the second thing about when I talk about the vegan diet, it's kind of shorthand, because veganism isn't a diet. It's veganism is philosophy, and adhering to the vegan diet, avoiding animal products is an important part of adhering to that philosophy. But it's really a diet suitable for vegans, isn't it? Or a diet free from animal products. And so vegan diet isn't quite accurate, because veganism is philosophy, not a diet, but we use
True, but the problem we've got now is, like, well, you can't say plant-based diet, because there's too many people that now define plant-based as mostly plants as opposed to plant exclusive. So, like, it's becoming a slippery slope in that regard.
Well, that's what Neil Robinson used to do. The first vegan footballer.
Yeah,
he used to talk about a vegan exclusive diet, and Sandra Higgins from Go Vegan World talks about a plant diet.
Well, it's plant diet, but it's also a little bit more than plants, because we can eat fungi as well, can't we? Mushrooms,
and salt and that kind of stuff.
It's a diet free from animal products, isn't it? I suppose that's but that's a very long way of saying it. So I think we say vegan diet as a
should we say vegans diet with an apostrophe and an S?
Vegan friendly diet.
Yeah, vegan friendly is pretty
I
good.
say that. I tend to say that more.
There is another question from Aisha, if you two want to answer it as well. What advice would you give me, vegan for 6 months, when trying to explain veganism to a meat eater?
Well, many of the things that the pioneers talked about, the fact that we talked about a philosophy, with a set of principles, and those principles are justice, peace, and non-violence. So the best thing to do, in fact, I put a video out today. we used to, when we did the stalls in Dublin, when people used to come up and say, "What's all this about?" Vegans would often say, "Oh, well, we're against this and we're against that and all that," and we would never do that. We would talk about what we were for, and so veganism is for justice and non-violence, and it's about ultimately veganism is the ultimate peace movement. So once you frame it like that, it changes the conversation, and it certainly doesn't. It certainly means that it's not immediately about food. I mean, food will crop up, but if you start a conversation like that, it doesn't. You talk more about the philosophical aspects of it. What would you say, Ron?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's absolutely right. But the reason why there's this kind of emphasis on other animals, because when you talk about injustice and when you talk about oppression and all those things, numerically, other animals are kind of overwhelmingly the victims of that. The oppression of other animals by humans is, in terms of numbers and scale, is the largest form of oppression, and it's something that everyone plays their part in through what they eat. I mean, somebody can, take in rescued animals. There can be, there can be someone who regards themselves as kind and loving or whatever towards other animals. But when they consume animal products, so somebody that here in the UK who consumes animal products, they're actually responsible for the killing and the imprisonment and suffering that also kind of goes on before that of almost 100 of our fellow animals every year. And because basically what someone does when they consume animal products is they're paying somebody else to kill animals for them. That's actually the mechanism of what is happening, right? And so that is something that is a way in which almost all humans contribute to this horrendous situation. And that is really why although veganism is opposed to all oppression and exploitation, that is why the other animals receive so much focus within it, and why the vegan friendly diet is such an important aspect of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So we've only got 5 minutes essentially. So I would ask a question as well, just on the back of that last one, and taking into consideration what Roger said. So instead of kind of giving people advice on what they shouldn't do, what would be a list of things that they definitely should try and do, whether that's communication in the street, on TikTok, or just having a conversation with something, a couple of things that they could potentially change or adjust to make sure they always mention?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. What they should do?
Yeah, so obviously quite often we're critical, and it should be like, you shouldn't do this, don't do this. But instead of looking at it like that way, instead of, in the sense that you were talking about, we're pro this, we're pro that. So what should be like a selection of do's?
Oh, right, yeah. Well, the VIP, we used to have a banner called Justice Before Profit. And so it's a little bit anarchic, this idea that if you want to do something, you should be critical about the thing that you want to do. And you should immediately ask the question, is what I want to do a just thing to do? And if it isn't, then you simply don't do it. So it's a kind of self-regulation thing, because anything that is unjust is a vegan issue. And so the first question from a vegan point of view, in terms of anything, is not, is this profitable, or is this going to be pleasant? It's going to be, is this a thing of justice or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, to say to people that they can play their part in creating a better world. They can play their part in creating a world, where we no longer have exploitation and oppression. They can play their part. They can do something in their own life that contributes towards that, towards that huge change in the world that will improve things so much.
Yeah, fair. Is there anything else? I haven't seen. There seems to be like regular discussions going on in the chat, but there doesn't seem to be any real questions. So, is there anything else that either of you wanted to say? I know you've got a show coming up. Is it this week?
It's next week. We've got a show, our Still Alive kind of series, which kind of goes out now once it's about every 3 weeks now, isn't it, Roger? We're also going to be kind of going back to, probably the best known founder of the vegan movement is Donald Watson. Donald Watson was a conscientious objector during World War II, and so we're going to talk about how that was relevant to his veganism, and so what the attitude of vegans should be to warfare today. In the modern age, we've got wars. There's actually quite a number of wars going on at the moment in the world. I mean, we hear about Palestine and Ukraine, but there's a lot of other places where there are wars going on that we don't hear much about.
Well, that's a question in itself. How come a focus? I mean, like what's going on in Palestine is obviously horrendous, and as Andy was saying, you can actually see it being streamed. But in some senses, it's taken the imagination of the world, right? So why haven't the others? The ones that are kind of unknown, which is an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody's saying in the chat here. So vegans don't honestly care about humans, really. And I think someone has answered. You obviously haven't been listening. I mean,
did you just of interest? Did you see the NAM statement they put up? The selection of black slides.
No.
It was about Palestine about a week ago. There was a quote in that I gave them that comes directly from the Donald Watson interview with George Roger, which is probably quite relevant to your Still Alive show.
Oh, okay, we'll check that out.
Yeah, I can sort of read it out if you want, but it's essentially he's talking about the fact that we can't solve any of our problems by this evil method. And that's essentially like it's a bit where he's naming names, people that he went to school with or people that he was friends with, and saying, they didn't come back. It's that section.
Oh, right. Yeah. Because he famously said that the war was a shattering thing, didn't he?
Yeah.
And then he did say that he'd lost quite a few friends.
Yeah, I think there's about eight different ones that he names, and it's got the same, and they never came back at the end of each sentence. Yeah.
Okay. And the weird thing is, as well, is that if the Luftwaffe were more efficient, Donald Watson himself might have been killed.
Potentially, yeah. If Leicester had been bombed instead of Coventry,
then
missed the target. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it sounds almost comical that they got the wrong city, but I suppose...
Well, I've never understood how you could... I mean, the fog must have been exceptionally thick to mistake an entire city for a reservoir. Because Leicester's, it's not a tiny place. But yeah, just fate, I guess.
Okay, what do you mean about the reservoir?
That's apparently what they thought it was. So because it's in a valley and the fog set on top of it, they basically flew over it. Thinking it was the reservoir.
So it was lying in the valley and it covered up all the... Yeah,
right, yeah. So they flew over it and thought they were flying over I can't remember what the name of the reservoir is, but yeah.
That makes a lot of sense if you're in the air and you haven't
I suppose. It just would have been enormous, a lot bigger than any other reservoir.
Well, these Midlanders, they drink a lot of water, don't they? And,
yeah, I mean, exactly. It's just the way it was fated, because obviously if Leicester had have been bombed, there's a very good chance that he wouldn't have made it, and everything could have been different.
Yeah, that is true, isn't it? But then again, of course, all the ones who died in the war, what would their contribution have been? Had they come back, if they had come back?
Yeah.
But most of them were vegetarians, though, weren't they?
Well, some of the people he mentions weren't even vegetarians. I think there's two that he mentioned that were just like students of his or whatever, or colleagues, and like doing woodworking. So yeah. Because there's one that I think is particularly interesting where he says he's a pacifist and he renounced his pacifism to go and join the war because he was so distraught at what he'd been heard or seen.
Right, that's interesting, isn't it? Again, it goes back to how people find out information about this kind of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it's 1940, I think, wasn't it? The Coventry bombing. So, like, you wouldn't have even had a vegan society. It's not like, well, it was afterwards, so the rest of the members would have been there. Potentially, it might not have ever happened.
Oh, well, that's the way it goes, folks.
Yeah.
And that's the way we go.
Then we can potentially start with the cross essays.
Yeah, so we'll move to the 1950s next week.
Yes.
I knew it would take us longer than I first thought it would, but that's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Okay then, people.
Okay. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much. And I guess hopefully I'll be back on my proper account next week.
Yeah, and thanks for your company, guys.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for modding the chat, and thank you guys, obviously.
Take care, everyone.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye-bye then.